Smart Lab in 2010. He's been working closely on all our collaborations with WaveDNA, and he's the recipient of a prestigious MyTax Elevate postdoc fellowship.
Thanks. So my talk will be a little different from the two excellent talks we heard from the keynote speakers. It is inspired by MIR, but it's certainly not pure MIR. It could have implications over MIR, and definitely it has implications much more along the lines of traditional cognitive science and psychology. I'll specifically talk about our work that involves computational modeling for predicting music emotion, and more specifically the use of neural networks. So, as we all know, one of the main reasons we listen to music is because music conveys emotions. It's a very engaging emotional experience. Now, one thing when listeners listen to music and we want them to provide us with their assessments, these could be based on various measures. One of them is the Wales arousal Russell's circumflex. But what's important to know is that these ratings are their own judgments of listeners. So there are two things that are coming into play here. One is the music. So you listen to the music, whether the audio file, in most cases in MIR. So it has information within it which you as the listener are perceiving, and you're aware that this is probably something indicating of sad or something more happier. But there's also another aspect, which is you feel some of that emotion, and there is evidence that music causes physiological changes in listeners. So we have two schools of thought here. One is being the cognitive supposition, meaning the judgment of emotion you make is based on what you perceive, what you know of within the music speeches itself. You don't have to necessarily feel it. And another school saying, no, it's actually what you feel. I prefer to think that it's actually both. Both can combine together in your assessment. So our focus is on both modeling emotion judgments from audio features, and then separately also modeling our emotion from physiological changes in listeners using neural networks. So with regard to audio features, with regard to both actually, there are several studies that have already used machine learning approaches for predicting discrete emotions from audio features. There are also several studies that have attempted to capture the physiological activity patterns associated with emotion during music listening. So our goal is to continue along this line of work. The purpose is to try to get a better understanding of this relationship. Audio features and emotion, and how these are what are the most important audio features. Is there a specific relationship to them? Same thing with physiological responses. And this is work that was just already recently presented, and we're also going to talk about what we might continue doing with this line of work. So we collected data from 45 undergraduate participants. They were all hooked up to biotype, from which we got 5 different physiological measurements: the zygomatic, corrugator, muscle activity, respiration, heart rate, galvanic skin response. Our stimuli were 12 classical music excerpts each from a different composer. So if you look at the Russell's two-dimensional circumflex, which is basically how excited the piece feels to the listener versus how unexcited on the y-axis, and the x-axis being how pleasant versus how unpleasant. Based on previous studies, we took 12 different stimuli, 3 from each quadrant. So you could categorize these quadrants into different emotion categories, but broadly you could say this is happy, this is agitated, this is sad, and this is peaceful. So we had 3 pieces from each that we selected from the previous study. And, we also extracted 13 low and mid-level audio features using MIR toolbars. A few examples of these features are like root mean square, low energy, event density, tempo, pulse clarity, since I'm almost there, zero cross, centroid, roll off, brightness, inharmonicity, irregularity, and so on. So, what participants, the procedure in which they heard these melodies was, so in any one of 4 random orders, and each excerpt was 2 minutes long. So they first heard 30 seconds of white noise, followed by 2 minutes of music, followed by silence. And the next piece, the sequence follows: white noise, music, silence, white noise, music, silence, etc. And then, so their physiological responses were being collected. And then in a separate session, they rated the valence and arousal for all these 12 pieces on a Likert type scale from 1 to 9. Going from unhappy to happy, or pleasant, calm to excited. And here you can just see what these melodies are. So agitated, happy, peaceful, sad, and I can just play one of them for you. So, but before we actually trained neural networks with these features, we did a basic correlation with each individual feature, and also we did multiple linear regression. So there were 5 different audio features which had strong positive correlation with arousal. And pulse clarity, zero cross, centroid, roll off, and brightness. For valence, there was only significant positive correlation with low energy and to some extent mode. Now, as regards multiple linear regression, only centroid I must has the strongest predictor. And this is all with audio features. We haven't moved to the physiological features yet. And for valence, we got a significant model with just low energy. Now, for physiological responses, found that sad musical excerpts correlated with large changes in heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance, temperature, and happy excerpts correlated with changes in respiration. So we found, we didn't find any, we have 5 different physiological measures, just to be reminding you. So we didn't find any correlation with either zygomatic or cardiac activity or respiration or Galvin's and skin response. But we did find a positive correlation with heart rate and arousal. Then, when we again did a multiple linear regression, which with all 5 physiological features as predictors, we didn't get a significant model for valence, but we got a significant model with 2 predictors as heart rate and response for arousal. So we get some sense of this relationship from just correlation and multiple linear regression. But we wanted to go beyond that and look at things in a non-linear way. And neural networks helps you find non-linear solutions and give you more insights into what's probably going on in these features. Now, Michael had talked extensively about classifiers, and classifiers have a lot of value. But we are taking a slightly different approach here and using neural networks more like regression functions, so that we get a function that provides us approximate values of valence and arousal. So, like one specific instance here is giving you the advantage of this approach for our data is if you look at the mean ratings across 20 participants that we use for our physiological modeling with emotion. There are cases like this, at least one case here, where with a classifier it is forced to have to choose between either happy versus agitated, whereas if you ask it to just provide a valence and arousal value, then we can choose whatever that emotion might be, or we at least know it's approximately to different categories that we could choose to label later on. So in that sense, we thought it was more useful than classifier. So I'm just quickly showing you the network architecture for both networks. The one on top is the audio features, surrounding bills, and this is the physiological features, surrounding bills. Both had just one hidden layer, and there were 13 audio features here, and 5 different physiological features there. So I'm just going to talk about any one of these networks, so that because the learning paradigm is more or less the same. Just looking at the physiological activity to emotion prediction network, you see the 5 different inputs there, and we had connection weights from here to the hidden layer, connection weights from the hidden layer to the output layer. These were all initially randomized. Now the training set, out of the 12 melodies, that's 3 from each quadrant, we only took 2 from each quadrant. So 2 in happy, 2 in agitated, 2 in peaceful, 2 in sad. And we normalized those values and then set the physiological response values for those 8 melodies and computed error for arousal and valence between what was the actual mean arousal valence value for the participants versus what the network's predicting. And once you get the mean squared error, you reduce the error by applying back propagation, which is a standard training paradigm for in a field power network. So this whole process took roughly 10,000 epochs, meaning all 8 sent in some randomized sequence, 10,000 such corrections, or weight updates, till we reduced the error to something less than 0.1. So just giving you an idea of how the error curve looks like. We have a number of epochs here, and the mean squared error reduces over time until the weights have components. So just showing you the results here for the audio features network. So the 13 audio features on which the network was trained for 8 different melodies. Now these are the melodies that the 4 other melodies, one from each quadrant, the network had never seen, is what it's being tested on. So it's important to get this figure correctly. So we have 4 different melodies from 4 different composers. The one in light is what the actual valence and arousal value is. So arousal on this y-axis and valence on the x-axis. And the darker one here is, I think I wrote that backwards. So you see the darker circle, the darker square here is the network's prediction. It's the same thing. Actual Schumann versus network's predicted Schumann. Mozart versus network's Mozart and Strauss. So you see it's doing quite fine in most of these. Maybe a little off the Strauss. One way to measure the performance we thought was take the average Euclidean distance, the mean Euclidean distance. So that gives you an error measure. In this case, it's 14.3%. You could sort of convert that into performance measure, which is 85.7%. You can also separate them based on just valence, just arousal. Both of them you can see more or less the same, around 90%. Now this is for the physiological activity emotion prediction. So you have the same 4 test melodies, the same 8 as training melodies. Again, you can see Stravinsky, the actual in light color, and the neural network predicted value in the dark colored square. Same thing with Schumann, Mozart, Strauss. If one of the melodies Strauss is off with valence, applying with arousal, there's only one melody where it's a little off. We again use the same measure of computing performance. Take the mean error as the Euclidean distance, and then convert it into a performance measure. So one thing to remember, to keep in mind here is, if you look at the performance here, it's somewhere around 81.6%, and in the previous case, it was about 85.7%. So you've lost a little bit, but what's interesting is that just with physiological responses alone, you can still predict emotion. Like there's enough contained in physiological physiological responses that from whatever the audio signal is. There's a lot of information in that felt emotion. One other thing we did was, so now this is again moving back to the audio features network, is just to get a sense of which predictor did better. So we have 13 features, so we wanted to know the contributions of each of these features. So what we did was we just took a fully trained network and individually knocked out each of the features and saw how detrimental it was to the performance of prediction for test values. And the one that's highest shows that the result, the error was maximum, meaning it was perhaps one of the most important contributors. So you see like a hierarchy of pulse clarity, first the mode, brightness, and low energy. This is for both valence and arousal contributions together. You could also separate them, as in this case, just for valence, just for arousal. One thing to keep in mind though is that this is only the 12 melodies. So 8 melodies are training melodies. For this training set, this is what matters most. This was the generalized procedure of the network. Same parallel you can do with the physiological activity. So here it's no more audio features, just the different physiological responses. And you can see corrugator, galvanic skin response, heart rate, respiration, all of them matter. But if you separate them by valence and arousal contributions, so you can notice a few things like, although corrugator and galvanic skin response matter for valence as well as arousal, look at how for arousal, heart rate just rises a lot more in terms of how important it is. And respiration maybe not so much. One other thing that we've been doing, we just kind of started doing this, is to bring in context into prediction. So all these valence arousal values that I showed you so far are for the entire piece together. So, but then you're losing a lot of contextual information, whether it's second by second or minute by minute or note onset, whatever you think is musical. So what we did was, this is like a separate set of participants, 9 participants. We took the audio features, but we broke each piece into 30-second segments and asked each participant to rate the first 30 seconds and then the second 30 seconds, thinking of the first 30 seconds as context, and then so on for all 4 30-second segments of the 2-minute piece. So now you have contextual data, and what we've implemented is a very basic recurrent network, which is an element network. So it just takes the previous 30 seconds hidden unit output, uses that as context for the next 30 seconds. We're still working on improving this. For now, these are just some results that we have showing that. So these are like each 30 seconds broken up in time. So it does fine with the arousal. On valence, it can capture the trend. It's off in terms of actual value. So there's more work to do here. But so although this is not a continuous response network, it still has context. And this is one thing that we'd like to continue working on. So what do we get from all of this? And what are its implications for this theme, CogMIR? The first thing is the data set, as I said, is very small. Melodies, training, 4 melodies, testing. Typically, I would say, I'm not an MIR person, but I'm sure in MIR would say usually they would use at least 100 or more melodies as your training set. So we need a larger representative sample to make more stronger, I guess, stronger conclusions. The network can be better at obtaining generalized. And another thing is, as I pointed before, the physiological activity network performed maybe not as well, but nearly as well as the audio features network. Like you didn't need to know what the audio features were. all that mattered was these were the responses that participants had based on listening to some specific type of music or style of music. So it would be, so it contains a rich amount of that information, but a combination of both, what you're perceiving from the features, what you're feeling, both together could provide a much more richer amount of information towards emotion prediction while listening to music. So along those lines, so again coming back to this figure, you could combine both audio features and physiological changes. Now there is some work that has already been done along these lines by Coutinho and Cangelos. But this is what interests me a little more, is you could think of this as a modeling tool and either use that as an explanation for a theory you might have. So for instance, one thing you can do is think of all of these as one set of features feeding directly into one hidden layer where you have some representations that are being built. And then once the network has learned to generalize, you have some values. And you could see how well a network like that does in comparison to just a music alone network or just a physiological features alone network. See how well that, what theoretical implications that has. Another thing you could do is just architecturally maybe think of these as two different cognitively modular pieces. So they're both, in the sense that you're thinking of perceived emotion as something different completely from the emotion you're feeling. And at some point, you're bringing the two together and making a conscious, informed decision about what the emotion and the piece is. So some subjective information goes into the physiological features now, and that's something to be aware of. So you could break all links here and only at the final point use some form of a gating mechanism to decide based on either a specific type of listener or even individual listeners over a period of time with more data. So I'd like to conclude with that. Just want to acknowledge all the people who were involved in this work. Chris Lachine for data collection and all our sponsors, NITAX, our partner Wave DNA, from whom you'll be hearing later on this afternoon, and Elsa Hester. Thanks.
So just a curiosity question. So you had these silence
Yes.
intervals. How much variance was there in the responses of the listeners? Like, were they all flat or?
I don't quite recall.
People tend to return to a physiological baseline when you give them silence. But the course of recovery is not the same across individuals.
Okay.
But along the same lines, there was a preference to use white noise as a baseline, not silence. Silence was used only for them to get back to.
Yeah, the intent was to get them all back to where they started before you give them the next piece.
Yeah, I'm just curious how much, like, I guess you can measure.
I don't know. I'm just, Finn might talk a little bit about this. Are you?
I'm not doing any physiology stuff. I mean,
But-
if you want to talk physiology, I can, but I don't know if anything here for that.
Yeah. The idea of looking at individual differences in physiological response is important, but extremely messy. And I pointed to Finn because she's one of the few brave souls that has ventured into that snake pit.
Associated with that, I'm not sure if I understand, do you have emotion readings from the same people that gave you physiological
Yes.
data? So what if, as opposed to learning on the average, you just learn on all that information? So have you tried mapping from, as opposed to aggregating per piece, saying per response, this is the rating that they gave, these are the physiological inputs, and to see what happens with that? I mean, it might just kind of fall
Right,
apart, or it could be interesting.
Like, I did try some of those actually. With physiological responses, they're very variable, even for the same person actually. So initially, when I tried to find a network that would actually predict based on one person's responses, it wouldn't do well. You need some mean, or perhaps the same person rating the same piece over several periods, and you take their physiological responses and take a mean, some averaging.
How are you taking the baselines out?
She usually has to go back to the, recall she, for the entire piece, she took whatever white noise, physiological activity was there,
And it was the last 5 seconds of baseline.
Okay.
Subtracted out.
So you normalized per moment rather than over an entire person's responses.
There was also some normalization across the person. All the values were normalized. So I believe the normalization took place after
After
the
baseline.
baseline was subtracted out.
The baseline was generated from the white noise signal. Or
The
silence?
final
5 seconds of the white noise.
If I remember the method right,
She didn't.
I'd have to follow up on the exact timing, but I believe it went from white noise to silence. Right?
No, white noise to the
White noise
pages.
straight into the new piece, and then it would have been the final 5 seconds of the white noise that took the baseline. These sound like leading questions.
Yeah, I mean, my response to white noise is usually agitation.
Well, we've seen that. We have actually seen that physiologically. It may not have been the best thing to return to people to baseline.
Another thing I'm really curious is if you've done any sequencing experiments, like if you play melody A and melody B and then melody B and melody A and you do that many times, is there any change in average ratings between the two?
We just had 4 random orders, just to avoid any
Yeah.
confound. Like we were more interested in avoiding confound rather than
Yeah.
looking at the sequence.
Yeah.
There's one study that's done that, but it's just looked at it within pieces, because you
Yeah.
often have, melody A, melody B, and then melody A return. And they were finding a GSR difference, I think it was, when the A returns.
Okay.
But that's within a structure that's, obviously related. I don't know how that would carry over when people aren't associating the pieces on purpose.
Yeah, there's this assumption which doesn't generalize here that the physiological response is going to be the same regardless of what you heard 10 minutes earlier, what time of day it is, and obviously that's not the case. So there's a lot of variability that we're not capturing.
Naresh, was in the neural network modeling, there is a tendency for migration towards the center of the valence arousal map.
Right.
So there's less discriminatory power overall, if that was a sort of general trend.
Okay. This one.
That one and the following one as well. There's a slight tendency to move towards the center. I wonder if the general trend for migration towards the center of the valence arousal map to affect some tweak on that to improve the model, because it does seem relatively consistent.
Here is where a larger debate set would end up, I think, just because certain things I'm assuming would affect the performance, like the number of hit units and using perhaps.
Yeah.
So let's use more than necessary. So it's learned, it's trained everything nicely, but that may be some overfitted function, which may not be the right function for actually testing. So if I had a good, at least there was an already, then you start generalizing a little more and different representation of different quarters. You get more.
is outside my area, so maybe this is sort of a silly thing to do, but like I think Ken has a very good point. We're talking about the differences between the people. And is it possible, rather than aggregating and then passing that into the model, to sequentially put person 1, person 2, person 3, and see what you end up with?
I did try that, like, but performance-wise, the network just cannot generalize to one person. It does it very poorly. Like you need, if it's the same person, it has to be over a period of time. Like I would have to ask the same person to listen to melodies so many other times, and then test against their mean for another melody that network has to be tested with.
We talked about the audio feature extraction, but on the physiological side, respiration, I'm assuming that the sensor you're using is a measurement from which you can extract potentially several features. Like you can look at the rate, you can also look at the acceleration or regularity, or there's all these other types of features that you could extract from this raw measurement. And I'm wondering if you've explored using, like even the semiconductors, like comparing the tonic level to the actual responses, or these different aspects of the information, different kinds of different information you could extract from the signal, and perhaps you could benefit from that.
It's very possible it might be able to benefit from richer features. It's very likely. This is, I would say, our first step into trying to use physiological features directly to try and emotion, and try to get as few, as quickly, as general, as broad, and then see what we get. And very encouraging, thankfully. So yeah, now we can start moving on to richer feature sets. If we feel there would be a relative improvement in performance, that's very important to kind of think in a top-down fashion and think, would it help me to invest so much time in laying out just the respiratory features, not sleep conductance features? Because at the end, we're not modeling so much as a very low level. It's still at a slightly conceptual level, so that we get an idea of what these are.
So we've still got about 6 or 7 minutes before break for lunch. Just wanted to invite Michael